So we're going to learn the pick up and lay down cast, also known as the 4-part cast. It has 4 parts: pick up, back cast, forward cast, presentation. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pick up, back cast, forward cast, presentation. So to do this cast, you're going to start with your thumb on the grip like that. Your rod tip's going to be in the water when you start, and it's going to finish in the water. You want the line out straight to begin. Here are the 4 parts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Pick up, back cast, forward cast, presentation. The pickup should be so slow that you can't hear the line come off the water. So slow you can't hear it come up. Look at where the back cast stop is. Look where the rod points. It doesn't point back, it points up. When we make that nice back cast stop pointing up, we have to pause with the rod motionless right there for about 1 whole second. Here's the pause. And that's to give the line time to fully straighten behind us so we can then make a good forward cast. There's the pause. Notice where the rod stops at the end of the forward cast. It stops way short, like pointing up in the sky. It stops there. There's a, watch this, there's a stop and a drop. So you stop with your rod really early, much earlier, much sooner than you would think you should. As the line unrolls after we make the forward stop there, we lower the rod tip along with the falling line, and we end up with the rod tip back in the water and the line out straight. This part's really important. Watch where my forearm points at the back cast stop. It points up. If your rod points up at the back cast stop and your forearm is angled up, I almost promise you, you'll make good fly casts, right? Like that. One thing you can't see as I'm doing this is that every cast I make starts slow and ends with a kind of a flick. It starts slow and ends with a kind of a flick. So it's slow flick, and down. However you think of this, however you describe this, you want to make sure that your rod goes slow here and ends with a kind of a, you start slow and you end with a kind of a, like that. You'll notice too that my elbow is comfortably relaxed at my side at the forward stop. It's there. You don't need to move your arm far to fly cast. You can keep your elbow really close to your side where you're comfortable and strong. It's just a comfortable casting position. You notice I'm lifting my elbow a little bit at the back cast stop. You don't even have to do that. You can just keep your elbow at your side the whole time. I find it a little more comfortable to lift at the back cast stop, and it actually works a little better for me. Let's pantomime a few of these casts. So you get your cell phone out. If you want to get your phone, it's fine. Here's the fly cast. Hello, it's for you. Hello, it's for you. So the reason this is important is because you want your hand somewhere close to your shoulder, your chin, your eye, your ear at the back cast stop. And that's important because your hand has got to travel maybe 1.5 feet between your back cast stop and your forward cast stop. If your hand doesn't travel at all and you do the cast like that, it's just going to be hard to learn to fly cast well. So you want to do something like, hello, it's for you, to make a good fly cast. Finally, you want to make sure that as you're casting, you've got the rod leaned out to the side away from you. You don't want the rod straight up and down because then the fly kind of knuckleballs at your face, and that's just not a comfortable, pleasant way to fly cast. All right. Do you have any questions? Okay, let's cast. Notice the dark background and the white rod and bright line. When you want to call their attention to something, make sure they can see it. You see me tapping on the grip here. Notice how much of a stop the stop is. The rod fully stops. If you're going to talk about a stop, you need to make an obvious stop. The pickup should be so slow that you can't hear the line come off the water. So what you're doing here is giving them a sonic cue, something that they can easily track themselves to know that they're making a good pickup. So I'm dropping an angle tool on here only so that you'll see how really short and intentionally short the rod rotation is. So it's a 50-degree rod rotation, a 50-degree arc, if you will. Not that that's important for beginners, but that just goes to show you how radically short this stroke is. Why? Your students are going to add a lot of rod rotation that you don't want them to add. So if anything, get them to err on the side of too little rod rotation by making a radically short rotation yourself. Okay, for those of you who think that this is a tailing loop, please see me after class. That is not a tailing loop. That's a really nice straight line path of the rod tip. That's a term I never use with students, ever. Please don't ever talk about straight line path with your beginner students. My intermediate and advanced students don't know the term, and they cast just fine. And we can talk more about why I don't drown my students in terminology and conceptual learning, because truth is they're trying to learn to fly cast. They're not trying to learn concepts about fly casting. Really important. Whoops. Watch where my forearm points at the back cast stop. Why am I making such a big deal out of this? You'll notice I haven't used the word wrist. My students never hear the word wrist. Why? Because the more I talk about the wrist, the more they're going to rotate it, which usually is going to be deleterious to the quality of their cast. So by getting them to have their forearm vertical like this, with the rod essentially pointing up, I don't have to talk about the body part that I don't want them to over-rotate. And what I'm doing here, you can see, is using what I call affirmative instruction. In other words, I'm telling them what to do instead of telling them what not to do. And the more you tell them what to do, and the less you tell them what not to do, the better they'll cast. So what you're going to hear is another example of positive instruction. I'm going to say to them, have your hand by your ear, point your rod up at the back cast stop, and you'll make good fly casts. Again, affirmative instruction, telling them what to do instead of what not to do. Here we go. If your rod points up at the back cast stop and your forearm is angled up, I almost promise you'll make good fly casts. It's not so much where you stop the rod, it's how you move the rod from the beginning of the stroke to the end of the stroke. So most beginners tend to use too much speed too early in the stroke, which means that they they have to slow down to a stop. So the hard part is not getting them to speed up to a stop. If it were that easy, we would just tell them to smoothly accelerate to an abrupt stop. By the way, again, acceleration is a word I never use with my students because acceleration to them means push your foot down on the gas pedal. It doesn't mean what we want them to do with the fly rod. So notice how I parse this, getting them to go from slow to fast. One thing you can't see as I'm doing this is that every cast I make starts slow and ends with a kind of a flick. it starts slow and ends with a kind of a flick. So it's slow flick, and down. However you think of this, however you describe this, you want to make sure that your rod goes slow here and ends with a kind of a. You start slow and you end with a kind of a. So you see here, I'm using both pantomime and sound to accentuate the slow to at the end. So I'm trying to cover all the learning bases these students have. One other thing you may have noticed by now is that unlike some really good casting instructors, I don't break the cast down into pieces and stop. In other words, I don't make a pickup, a lift, and then stop the rod. I've had too many students over the years who have seen those freezes, and instead of listening to the words that I used, they did what they saw me do, which was to stop. So some of my students, when they see me make a pause sort of at the pickup, make a pickup and stop there, they'll actually have a kind of a hitch in their pickup to backcast. They'll make a pickup, they'll pause, and then they'll make a backcast. They'll wait too long, the line will fall to the ground. Then they'll make a forward cast, the line falls to the ground, and then they lower the rod down. So the point is, I do this, as a peer of mine says, holistically. He doesn't like that I do that. I could be wrong, but that's how I do it. So now we get to the style piece. It's not the only way to cast. It's not necessarily the best way to cast, maybe not for them. It is for me, and the truth is that a bunch of world champion flycasters cast in this style out to, say, 60 feet or even 70 feet. I cast in this style to 80 feet. If I watch a student and they look too sort of stiff or stilted or sort of constrained, I'll have them drop their dominant foot back and open up and cast with a more sort of side elbow style. But most people do just fine with this. And as I say, a bunch of people have won world championships in accuracy throwing this way. You'll notice, too, that my elbow is comfortably relaxed at my side at the forward stop. It's there. You don't need to move your arm far to fly cast. You can keep your elbow really close to your side where you're comfortable and strong. It's just a comfortable casting position. So here comes a little bit of humor. People always laugh about this. They love it. Let's pantomime a few of these casts. So you get your cell phone out. Hello, it's for you. Hello, it's for you. So the reason this is important is because you want your hand somewhere close to your shoulder, your chin, your eye, your ear, at the backcast stop. So what I'm doing here, again, is giving them a kind of visual reference that they can use themselves. They can't see themselves fly cast. They certainly can't see their own loops. By the way, you may have noticed, no, I'm not having rank beginners try to watch their backcast, critique their own backcast, and make corrections on the subsequent backcast based on the image of the last backcast they have stored in memory. In fact, if you watch most flycasters attempt to watch their backcast, you'll see their casting actually get worse. So what you see here is that instead of having them imagine that I'm tilting the rod to the side, I need to face them so they can see the rod leaned out to the side. And yeah, that's leaned over somewhat farther than I actually do in my own casting. And that's because I want to exaggerate, as I do with almost everything, the important things that I want them to do. Always ask for questions at the end.